8 for a wish. You heard the news? Brendan asked excitedly. Course I have. The Empire have made a sodality to solve the Valorn problem. Dice sighed theatrically and rolled his eyes derisively. Can't believe we didn't think of that. Think of all that time we wasted walking round the place, when we could have been sat in Anvil drinking tea and talking about fighting the Valorn. You're not in favour then? Brendan inquired in the face of the guide's withering sarcasm. I don't know. The old man sounded genuinely unsure. Brendan had learned of late not to be fooled by this feigned indecision. He'd known Di for 20 years, and in all that time the priest always had a contrary opinion on everything. But recently he'd taken to pretending otherwise in the belief that it made him look deliberative and considered. You think we should ignore it then? That we can do this on our own? If by do this on our own you mean lose everything, then yes, we can definitely do that. Di hawked and spat to underline his contempt. You can't give up hope, Di. We're not going to lose everything. Yes, we are. Di cut his friend off before he could carry on. We've lost Azalea's dance. We've lost Liathovan. We've lost the Runen. Thanks to those hotheads at Anvil, we've lost the Stridings. We're losing the war to the Valorn and we're not even fighting yet. Yeah, well, we'll start fighting back soon, once we've beaten the Druge. You mean once we've beaten the Druge and stabilised the other fronts? Di waved 2 fingers on each hand as he spoke the last words to underline how unimpressed he was. By which they actually mean beaten the Druge and the Grendel and the Jotun and the Thul too if we can't get a deal with them. That'll never happen. Never has, never will. Which is how you know this war with the Valorn will never happen. The military council couldn't give 2 warm shits for the Valorn. Bad news for those of us who have to live next to it. You're still bitter about that lost vote, Brendan said, half in protest, half in sympathy. As a grapefruit, admitted the guide candidly. We told them to wait, to plan, to prepare. Instead, we've gone off half-cocked. We need armies and forts. For that, we need money and wains more than anything else. We need allies. Currently, we've got none of those things. Without those things, we lose. The Navarre will never stop fighting, protested Brendan, dismayed by the bleak tone the guide was taking. He was not the only one, of course. The abandonment of Thorunin had hit a lot of people hard. Azalea's dance have stopped fighting. Brendan winced and looked hurt. It was a cheap point, and Di knew it, but he pressed on anyway. Look, the Stridings have come home. Even them bloody highborn grey guard folks have gone home. So now nobody is fighting the Valorn and nobody is walking the trods. I was worried we'd go off half-cocked to attack the Valorn before we were ready. I was a blind fool. The real danger is we bring everyone home and then don't go off at all. Today it's Thorunin. 10 years or 20 years from now, we'll be abandoning her Kinea to the Valorn. Brendan stared at his friend. So, what do we do? I don't know. But maybe, just maybe, this sodality could be an answer. Di put his head down and stared at his feet, his train of thought finally trailing off. You said it was a talking shop, Brendan quibbled. People won't listen to us. Why would they listen to some sodality? Right. That's a great question. Why would anyone listen to some sodality? Di let the question hang rhetorically in the air for a moment, and then he broke into a big grin. But here's the real question. What can we do to make people listen to it? Overview. Following the successful creation of the Apothecaries Guild at the winter solstice, the Senate passed administrative motions approving the establishment of 2 additional imperial sodalities, the Magpies and the Valorn Guard. While the former has yet to be ratified by the throne, Emperor Vesna did ratify the creation of the Valorn Guard during the spring equinox. Following the procedures developed for the Apothecaries Guild, the Imperial Civil Service have done what they can to make people across the Empire aware of the manifesto of the Valorn Guard, so that citizens can consider if they wish to join. The first task is for all the new members to be inducted into the sodality. To assist with that, the Civil Service have prepared an arcane projection that will allow a large number of citizens to join. Once everyone has had a chance to join, then the sodality can consider any response. The Valorn Guard are a sodality dedicated to ending the threat of the Valorn, based on the belief that cooperation between nations of the Empire can open the way to the destruction of the Empire's oldest, and some say greatest, enemy. Traditionally, the burden of responsibility for destroying the Valorn has fallen on the Navarre, but the truths revealed by the Great Library of Hakinian, with the assistance of scholars both imperial and otherwise, have opened up the prospect that the complete destruction of the Valorn could be achieved in their lifetimes if the Empire focused on it. Highguard, Varushka, and the League may be ready to step up to the mark and fight alongside the Navarre, but are the other nations willing to do likewise? The Valorn Guard may be the answer to that question, if they can find a way to convince others to commit to the war. Joining the Sodality. The Civil Service has prepared an arcane projection using autumn magic of magnitude 20 to defray some of the costs of casting Mark of Fellowship on the number of people likely to wish to join. To aid the formation of the new Sodality, the Civil Service has created an arcane projection that will allow everyone present who is willing to join. The magnitude 20 autumn ritual is identical to the one provided during the creation of the Silver Chalice and will be presented to the incumbent senator for Semaholm, Amicia of the Semilak. The aim is to reduce the cost required for a lot of people to join the Sodality when it is newly created. The Civil Service has reserved the use of the Senate Chamber for the Valorn Guard from 1500 to 1530 on the Saturday. The first order of business is likely to be performing the ritual, so a member of the Sodality would need to find 10 mana crystals and a coven prepared to cast it if they intend to use it. After everyone has had a chance to join the Sodality, the title of Speaker of the Valorn Guard will be elected. If any legal powers have been delegated to the Sodality, then they will be able to employ them by simple vote of the Valorn Guard present following the appointment. The Sodality is dedicated to ridding the Empire of the Valorn. It holds the following to be true. The Valorn is the greatest spiritual threat the Empire has seen. The threat can be dealt with via Imperial cooperation. Further opportunities should be sought to deal with this threat. The Sodality therefore exists to rid the Empire of the Valorn, to encourage international cooperation on the matter, to provide opportunities to virtuous citizens to aid in the fight against the Valorn. Manifesto of the Valorn Guard. Scrutiny. Scrutiny of the Sodality's manifesto has identified a number of titles that fall within the jurisdiction of the Sodality. The Imperial Senate could grant the Sodality the power to request an appraisal. The Constitutional Court has scrutinized the manifesto of the Valorn Guard and identified 3 national positions that fall within their jurisdiction, given its remit to rid the Empire of the Valorn. They will raise administrative motions on the Saturday of the next summit to see if the titles can be amended to make them constitutional, given the existence of the new Sodality. The Senate have confirmed that they want the Valorn Guard to provide opportunities for virtuous citizens to aid in the fight against the Valorn. The Constitutional Court suggests that the most effective way to achieve this would be to grant the Sodality the power of appraisal. There may well be other issues that will come to light in the future on further scrutiny or other powers that the Imperial Senate could theoretically grant the Valorn Guard. The 2 legal issues listed below are the only ones identified by the court at this stage. The Constitutional Court has identified a number of imperial titles which are focused on the Valorn. The majority of these titles are national positions appointed by the Navarre, although there are some in other nations such as the Knight of the Greenwood, a Dornish position, or the Green Watcher, a Highborn position. After a great deal of discussion, the court has come down on the side of not ruling most of these titles unconstitutional. Different members have different reasons for doing so. Chief Magistrate Abraham cited the disruption it would cause Senate and the Empire to make all these titles subject to appointment by a Sodality, especially given they would retain their national character. Imperial Archivist Leontes, on the other hand, filibustered for nearly an hour about the historical roots of the Navarre, their cultural emphasis on fighting the Valorn, and the Sodality's own manifesto point about encouraging international cooperation on the matter (of the Valorn), starting out by stripping half a dozen established titles, including the newly constructed Wayhouses, from the Navarre for dogmatic reasons seemed like a poor way to support that agenda. So for the time being, the guidance of the Constitutional Court is that going forwards, the well-worn path for appointing any new imperial title relating to the Valorn or with responsibilities to fight or prepare for fighting the Valorn would be appointment by the Sodality rather than any other method. The court will not ask the Speaker to raise administrative motions to correct these scores of titles that could be argued to fall within the new Sodality's purview, but they note that the irregular election method should not be taken as an example of a well-worn path when the Senate is considering creating or amending a new title. A Senate motion could, of course, be used to change the method of appointment of any existing title whose responsibilities are to deal with the Valorn, just as it could be used to turn a national title into an imperial title, making it a better fit for appointment by an inter-nation sodality. Role of the Advisor. The Advisor on the Valorn cannot continue to be appointed in its current form. There are a number of administrative motions that will be raised to help resolve this issue. There is, however, one title that the Constitutional Court are deeply concerned about, and that is the Advisor on the Valorn. One of the first new titles created after the death of Empress Britta, the Advisor is responsible for advising the Senate on matters relating to the Valorn and protecting the Empire from the influence of this mysterious force or entity. It has the power to address the Senate, to advise them on matters relating to the doom of Taruniel. Now that there is an imperial sodality charged by the Senate to rid the Empire of the Valorn, encourage international cooperation on the matter, and provide opportunities to virtuous citizens to aid in the fight, it places the Advisor at odds with the Constitution. The title will need to change if it is to continue to be appointed. The Constitutional Court has identified 3 ways forward. In the civil service will present 3 administrative motions to allow them to efficiently make a decision about the path to take. They will be presented at the Saturday evening Senate session, to give senators time to adopt a different solution if they prefer. Given the importance of the order they are presented in, the Speaker for the Senate will ask the newly appointed Speaker for the Valorn Guard which order they will be raised in, although the conscience of the Senate could invoke the precedence of virtue to move a different motion or administrative motion to the start of the session. This both provides opportunities for the Valorn Guard to discuss with the Advisor on the Valorn and for a senator to present their own solution to the problem of the Advisor during earlier sessions if desired. If one of the 3 administrative motions passes, any remaining will be removed from the Senate agenda. Reassignment. The Advisor on the Valorn could become a title appointed by the Valorn Guard. If this were done, it would become an imperial title responsible for advising the Senate. The Senate could amend the title to give it the ability to address the military council. The Advisor on the Valorn title could pass to the Valorn Guard to appoint. If this vote passes, the title will become an imperial position elected by the sodality. It will retain the power to address the Senate, but it could be given other powers, such as the ability to address the military council in line with its wider significance as an advisor chosen by the Valorn Guard. If this were done, the title would lose responsibility for protecting the Great Library at Hercynian, which would pass instead to the Singer of the Silence. Redirection. The Advisor of the Valorn would remain a title appointed by Navarre senators. It would lose the power to address the Senate and the responsibility to advise the Senate and protect the Empire. It would instead gain the power to address the Valorn Guard and a responsibility to advise them. The Advisor on the Valorn draws much on the Navarre traditions and history for fighting the Valorn. Rather than advising the Senate separately to the Valorn Guard, however, it could have its responsibilities and powers adjusted such that it was still constitutional to be appointed by the Navarre senators. Instead, it would be responsible for advising the Valorn Guard, drawing on the centuries of experience the Navarre have in fighting Taruniel's bane. If this path is chosen, the title loses the responsibility to advise the Senate and protect against the Valorn. Instead, it becomes responsible for advising the Valorn Guard and sharing the expertise of Navarre with the imperial sodality. They would lose the ability to address the Senate and instead gain the power to address the Valorn Guard, able to make a single, short address during a formal meeting of the sodality, even if they were not themselves a member. They would retain responsibility for the Great Library at Hercynian, instead as the custodian of the greatest archive of information about the Valorn anywhere in creation. This serves to reinforce their position as an advisor to the Valorn Guard. Redefinition. Removing the responsibility and power of address would leave the advisor constitutionally valid as a Navarre title. They would retain custodianship of the Great Library at Hercynian. It is the responsibility and power to address the Senate that causes problems with this title. With that in mind, the third administrative motion simply strips these powers for the advisor on the Valorn and renames it. If this choice is made, the advisor would lose the ability to address the Senate, would be responsible only for overseeing and protecting the Great Library at Hercynian, and would be renamed Custodian of Hercynian. They would remain a respected authority on the history of the struggle against the Valorn and the fall of Taruniel, but they would not have any legal powers. Resignation. The Senate could choose not to pass any of these administrative motions. The advisor on the Valorn would remain as it currently is, but could not be reappointed once the current holder left the post. If the Senate chooses to do nothing, the title would simply continue as it is, but it would not be possible to appoint anyone new to hold it. When the incumbent Nether Altamgale leaves the position, it would not be possible to appoint anyone else to hold it while the Valorn Guard still existed in its current form. Powers. The Constitutional Court has identified certain powers that could be passed to the Valorn Guard to help them in pursuance of their responsibilities. As well as identifying the problem with the advisor on the Valorn, the Constitutional Court has presented some powers that could logically be given to the Valorn Guard based on their manifesto. In search of opportunity. The Imperial Senate could grant the Sodality the power of appraisal to permit them to find opportunities to fight the Valorn. Part of the Sodality's manifesto is to provide opportunities to virtuous citizens to aid in the fight against the Valorn. It is not clear what the Sodality can do to devote themselves to this goal in a rigorous way. No doubt individual members will strive to pursue any leads that might provide a chance to catch the Valorn off guard, but the only consistent way that the Empire has to ensure that an opportunity is found is through the use of appraisal. At present, the Prognosticator's Office has the resources to conduct up to 2 appraisals each season. The Imperial Senate could use a Senate motion to grant the Sodality the power to order 1 or 2 appraisals, or they could give them the power to direct all the appraisals conducted by the Empire. In all cases, the simplest way for the Sodality to use that power would be by vote of the members. When the work on researching the Valorn was completed, the scholars involved were clear that everything that could be discovered about the nature of the Valorn had been discovered. The Empire now possesses every scrap of knowledge that it is possible to have about the Valorn. There are no more ancient records, no more lost repositories of secret information. There is nothing more that can be learned about the Valorn now. However, that doesn't mean a well-worded appraisal couldn't identify ways to attack the Valorn in a specific region or territory, or protect against its expansion, or identify opportunities to prepare forces to fight against it. The nature of an appraisal is that it is open-ended. It's not a search for missing knowledge. Rather, the goal is to identify where one or more chances exist to try and achieve a goal in a different way. The Empire already knows how to defeat the Valorn, but that requires a war. An appraisal could identify different ways to actually fight that war once it begins. There is no requirement for the Senate to do this. There is no constitutional necessity for them to provide the Sodality with the means to procure opportunities to fight the Valorn. It is simply an option that the court have identified as being constitutional. If the Senate were minded to do this, they would need to pass a Senate motion to that effect. A war of words. The Senate could grant the Sodality the power to appoint generals. The Senate could amend the advisor on the Valorn or create a new imperial title with the power to speak and vote in the military council. Much like the advisor on the Valorn, the general of an imperial army is a national position appointed by the Senate. This appointment method is unusual, not least because the senators are forbidden from entering the military council chambers during a session to ensure that the council can operate without interference from the Senate. In theory, the Synod could be given the job of appointing generals by vote of national assemblies, but that change has never been attempted. However, the Imperial Senate has charged the Sodality with the task to rid the Empire of the Valorn. That task explicitly demands massive military forces to accomplish, so the Senate have instructed the Sodality to accomplish something that will need armies to achieve. The Senate could use a motion to amend the general of a single army to make it be appointed by vote of members of the Valorn Guard. The position must remain a national appointment. A general cannot be an imperial position, but given the mandate they may have been given by the Senate, it would not be unconstitutional for the Senate to devolve the power to appoint generals to the Sodality. That could be done piecemeal, by using individual Senate motions to change the election method of a single general, or the method could be changed for all armies using a single Senate motion. The first change would be a constitutional motion. It would be a clear change to the written constitution which explicitly mandates that the Senate appoint the generals of the armies. The constitution would need to be changed to make the new route explicit as part of the motion. If that were done, subsequent motions would only require majority vote to pass. A much less drastic change might be to create a new imperial title, a position elected by the Sodality that would sit in the military council and vote with the other members. The obvious parallel is the War Mage, which is appointed by the conclave but has a voice and a vote in the council. This could be an entirely new imperial title, Or the Senate could choose to amend the position of the advisor on the Valorn to make it an imperial position that had the power to act in the military council instead of, or as well as, its existing power to address the Senate. Creating a new voting member of the military council would also be a constitutional vote. Patronage. In recent years, a number of nations, or their leading citizens, have been vocal about the need to fight the Valorn. Last season, Estella Lucati delivered a powerful sermon from Cappadomus Cathedral, drawing on the influence of the true consecration of ambition to urge the defeat of the Valorn. Arguably, the most powerful example was the decision by the highborn nation to walk the Trods, the pilgrimage of the Grey Pilgrims that lasted almost 7 full years, 1 year spent walking the Trods of the Empire for each of the virtues. Highguard, the League, Varushka all found a way to proclaim their support for the fight against the Valorn. If they threw their support behind this new sodality, it could prove invaluable. Of course, the most important support is likely to come from the Navarre themselves, if they chose to give it. Blood Red Valorn Guard, League. The League could enact a mandate to permanently sacrifice the benefits of the Blood Red Gallery, Blood Red Museum, and Bloody Great Theatre to provide a bequest for the new sodality. Lorenzo La Volpe was one of the most prominent philanthropists in recent times. As part of the Bloody Butchers Guild of Temeshwar, he made a fortune from rising bourse prices in the years between the death of Empress Britta and Empress Lisabetta. He used that money to fund projects all over the empire, seizing any opportunity to erect massive monuments to his own munificence, arguably. For a while, there was talk of having Lorenzo made an exemplar of prosperity for the legacy that he left. It came to nothing, but the crossed cleavers that he insisted on putting on everything he built still cover some of the grandest buildings in the League to this day. But is this really the best legacy possible for one of the Empire's richest benefactors? Lorenzo La Volpe might not have been an exemplar, but nobody ever denied he was not a canny and ruthless businessman, one who never failed to take advantage of an opportunity to put his name on something. Roads, theatres, museums, art galleries, all impressive. But what about putting his name on the destruction of the Valorn? Now that would be a legacy. They'd have to make him a paragon for that. Regrettably, Lorenzo is dead and gone, and all that remains are the great works and ministries he commissioned. There are a group of Temeshwari bakers who claim that the old butcher faked his death and is even now masquerading as the so-called Rat King, determined to have his revenge on the League for failing to make him an exemplar. Most folk are not that foolish. His supporters, and there are more than a few, accept that he has passed, but they argue his legacy could still do one last thing for the Empire. There are more than a few jokes about renaming the sodality the Blood Red Valorn Guard, but once people have sobered up, the kernel of an idea does surface. 3 of Lorenzo's most iconic monuments are the Blood Red Keys Art Gallery, the Blood Red River Museum, and the Bloody Great Theatre. Patronised by artists and performers, the resplendent, if gaudy, architecture serves as a breathtaking showcase for some of the greatest cultural experiences in the League. Their presence swells the congregations of priests in Temeshwar, Tasato, and Sarvos, ensuring increased supplies of liao to the League's priests. What if they were repurposed? What if artists, musicians, actors, and entertainers, and their wealthy patrons, were instead encouraged to donate to the Valorn Guard? What might that achieve? While art in the service of virtue has a long and worthy tradition in the League, art in the service of money has existed significantly longer and raised a lot more interest. Virtuous art inspires, but it is a sad truth that art that doesn't try to preach the virtues often sells a lot better. Those who would like to see Lorenzo made an exemplar argue that if the League Assembly encouraged these cultural institutions to focus their efforts on raising funds for the war against the Valorn, then rather than celebrating the League's virtue, they could produce a valuable stream of income for the Valorn Guard, a blood-red bequest. Given the endorsement of the Archbishop of Cappadomus, all it would take is a simple mandate. We must sacrifice, we must pay, we must act. We must dare do all. We send named priest with 50 doses of lao to encourage the patrons of the Lorenzo's legacies to support the Valorn Guard. Nothing is beyond our reach. Synod Mandate, League National Assembly. If this mandate is enacted by the League National Assembly, then the level of investment provided by the Blood Red Keys Art Gallery, the Blood Red River Museum, and the Bloody Great Theatre will be removed. They will no longer provide 2 doses of lao to congregations in their territory. Instead, they will create a single bloody bequest of 8 thrones each season for the Valorn Guard. If the mandate is enacted with the imprimatur of Estella Lucati either raised by them or enacted by them, then it will produce 10 thrones each season. Regardless of how much was produced, the Valorn Guard would be able to vote each season for a citizen to receive the money. It could then be used to fund the purchase of tools for fighting the Valorn, weapons, armor, potions, and enchantments for direct conflict, wains towards the establishment of armies or fortifications in preparation for that final war, or even, as the Freeborn would likely point out, to secure the support of others through bribery and gifts. Whatever happens, the curator of the Blood Red River would not be affected. That title would still receive donations and Lao, even if their patrons were to direct their support to the Valorn Guard. Likewise, the structures themselves would still stand and still attract audiences as they do today. The difference will be the emphasis on fundraising, rather than supporting virtue and the bishops. Boyar and Burger, Varushka. The Varushkan Assembly has been in favour of the war against the Valorn, which encourages their people to support the Valorn Guard. The Varushkan Assembly has not shied away from the fight with the Valorn. In summer 386 YE, they passed a judgment submitted by Vaclav Miladinovich Kosti with a greater majority urging the nation to stand shoulder to shoulder with their Navari cousins. They quickly enacted the ensuing mandate urging Varushkans to use their knowledge of the dark powers to fight the Valorn. Now there is another chance for the nation to put their measures where their mouth is. Iron to forge a spear. The Senate could expand the powers of the Boyar of the Iron Roads to allow them to help the Valorn Guard. The first group to step up are the people who support the Boyar of the Iron Roads. The Boyar is responsible for maintaining the Iron Roads of Varushka and boosting the prosperity and pride of its people. The Boyar has offices in every Varushkan territory and can draw on the support provided to commission a ministry anywhere in the nation each season. Currently, the remit of the office is limited. The titles created must be Varushkan national positions elected by tally of the votes. There are plans afoot to expand the powers of the office to allow them to create sinecures as well, but those are not yet complete. Inspired by the words of the Varushkan Assembly, the Boyar of the Iron Roads could have their powers extended by the Imperial Senate to allow them to build ministries and eventually sinecures anywhere in Varushka that could be appointed by the Valorn Guard, provided they produced ingots or measures. Of course, someone would still have to fund the commission, so some arrangements would have to be made, but it would make it much easier for the Varushkans to support the Valorn Guard and give the Sodality access to the valuable materials needed to construct vital tools such as the Bloodfire Periapt, Abraxas Stone, or Scorpion's Sting. All it would take is a Senate motion to confirm the necessary expansion of legal powers. A two-bladed knife. The Ketsov have asked the Senate to change the Burger of Ketsov to be a Varushkan title appointed by the Sodality. The other group that have expressed interest in helping the Valorn Guard are surprisingly the Ketsov of Ossium. The divisive family grouping were one of the largest human factions in Ossium when the Druj were driven out and territory conquered. They are unpopular with many other groups in Ossium, and though they have embraced the benefits of becoming imperial citizens, they have faced inquisition by the Varushkan Assembly and been given penance as a consequence. If the Synod hoped that the Ketsov would accept the penance with good grace, then they are likely to be disappointed. It is clear that this rebuke has rankled some of the family. They seem to believe that there was a political element to their inquisition, something to do with a conflict involving face stealers where they believe the Synod sided with the monsters rather than the Ketsov. Crucially, they are utterly frustrated by the representation of the office of the Burger of Ketsov, which they feel is completely failing to look out for their interests or work on their behalf. They visited Anvil recently to speak with the Varushkans, but it seems that the meeting brought them no satisfaction. As a result, the Ketsov have decided to withdraw their support for the position of Burger. They are adamant that the current system of election, tally of the votes, is picking Burgers who are only interested in the ingots, measures, and magic items the Ketsov provide, and are utterly disinterested in them or their well-being. They are no longer prepared to offer any support for the Burger for as long as they remain appointed in this way. If this impasse continues, the title will not be able to gain any benefits from the Ketsov ministry or the Ketsov Mir Mozga. The title will effectively cease to have any beneficial legal powers. The Ketsov claim the impasse is an opportunity to meet the demands placed on them by the Varushkan Synod. They were instructed to find ways to build up their fellow Varushkans, so they will resume support for the Burger of Ketsov, provided the position is appointed by the Valorn Guard. They are happy for the title to remain as a Varushkan national position. They simply want the Sodality to elect a Varushkan who can represent their interests to other Varushkans. That way, they can work to build up the prosperity of Varushkan members of the Valorn Guard and represent the nation in the fight against the Valorn. They would presumably want a meeting at the autumn equinox with a Valorn Guard-appointed burgher to discuss what magic items will best serve the cause. But regardless, they are no longer prepared to be represented by a citizen chosen by the Varushkan Bourse. Like the changes to the Boyar of the Iron Roads, the change to the Burgher of Ketsov would need to be appointed by a Senate motion. This might be politically difficult and risks getting the Senate involved in a messy political situation in Ossium. That is likely not a coincidence. It is somewhat hard to imagine the Ketsov really care all that much about the threat of the Valorn, given it's likely no member of the family has ever seen or encountered its spawn in their life. Folks who know the Ketsov well suspect this is more likely to be a show of power to the Varushkan Assembly and others. If no Senate motion passes, or if it is vetoed, then the position of Burgher of the Ketsov will remain a Varushkan position appointed by tally of the votes, but it will no longer be provided with any ministry benefits. Whatever happens, the title is up for re-election at this summit, and presumably the first order of business will be to sort things out with the family, regardless of how it ends up being appointed. Shields and Cordials, Highguard. An opportunity to help the Valorn Guard defend against the Valorn has been identified by members of a retirement chapter. The benefactors of Highguard could take this opportunity to offer potential assistance to the Valorn Guard. There may be a possibility to persuade Lord Rain to support the Valorn Guard. The Highborn were one of the first nations to identify the threat of the Valorn to people's souls and resolve to fight against it alongside the Navarre. They sent out the Grey Pilgrims to walk the Trods, and when it became clear there was a chance to strike at the Valorn, they called them home again. While the Grey Pilgrims prepare for a chance to mount a military campaign against the greatest spiritual threat to the Empire, there are others who look to the defence of Imperial lives against the infinite hunger of the Valorn. Stone endures. The plans for citadels were developed to defend against the Valorn, and it is believed might actually attract Valorn spawn attacking a territory. The sodality could be given the ability to commission a citadel each season. If that happens, the Stone Airy chapter will ensure it won't count against the maximum number of commissions available. In 381 YE, the heirs of Lepidus discovered a connection between the foundations of the Silent Sentinel and Casanea and the paragon known as the Sentinel. The General Assembly had the Great Hall of the Fortification consecrated with Truliao by Racer, Exarch of the Scions of Ravensfell, and the Senate commissioned a great bell tower to serve as a place of pilgrimage for dedicants of vigilance from across the Empire and beyond. During the reign of Empress Lisabetta, the inspiration of the Sentinel was used to good effect to help defend the Empire against the barbarians that threaten it, especially along the Bay of Katazar. 6 years later, a chapter house has been founded at the fortification, the Stone Airy. Composed of veteran adherents of the principles of vigilance, they number several retired benefactors and more than a few siege engineers, former highborn generals, and 2 cardinals among them. They seem to have become fired up by the establishment of the Valorn Guard, with particular emphasis on the importance of preparing for the coming war against the greatest spiritual threat to the Empire. The exarch of their chapter, Ebekiah the Younger, a former Cardinal of Vigilance now well into his 7th decade, has members of the chapter talking to people across Highguard and beyond about a vigilant and virtuous plan. The League and Urizen in Spiral collaborated on a plan to defend the Empire from the Valorn. Their idea was to prepare for such a war by building the biggest possible citadel in a region next to each Valorn-infested territory. When the Valorn expands, it is certain to focus on the citadel, giving the Empire the best possible chance of blunting that assault. Citadels are expensive, but the Stone Airy recall the heyday of vigilance when the inspiration of the Sentinel saw enthusiasm for building defences reach fever pitch. They believe that with the help of the Benefactors' Council, the Valorn Guard might be able to find ways to raise enough citadels to serve as a serious defence against the Valorn. If the Imperial Senate is prepared to give the power to, once each season, commission, reinforce or repair citadels to the Valorn Guard, the experienced veterans of the Stone Airy will come out of their assorted variations of retirement and seclusion to help oversee that construction. Several of them have experience in the civil service, and others were adept in their more active years at organising groups of workers or warriors. Their expertise would prove invaluable. Any such work would not count against the limited number of commissions that the Imperial Senate has each year. There is a downside, of course. The Senate would need to foot the bill for the upkeep of these structures. But if Highguard is sincere in its intent to fight the Valorn, then Ebekaya the Younger is confident that they will be able to use their political sway to secure this power for the Valorn. Gold empowers. A mandate supporting the Valorn could be passed. Donations of white granite to the Benefactors Council would increase from 10 wains to 12 wains. Since the death of Empress Britta, the Benefactors Council have represented the economic leadership of Highguard. They've played a crucial role in the nation, driving investment for virtuous reasons as they seek to lift up their fellow citizens. Their prosperity and hard work have been crucial in enabling the nation to support projects such as the Grand Inspiration of the Way. As part of their work, the Council are the recipient of donations from various highborn citizens, allowing them to direct a constant stream of resources towards whichever civilian commission the Council has elected to endorse. The Valorn are seen by many in Highguard as a concrete step towards the destruction of the Valorn. Highguard has committed to the destruction of the Valorn and to seeking opportunities to support that lofty ambition, including the use of mandates. The following mandate has been proposed to support the Valorn. We must all of us guard against the danger of the Valorn and be prepared for its malice. We send named priest with 50 doses of Liao to urge the people of Highguard to remember that there are few defences better than a stout stone wall. Synod Mandate, Highguard National Assembly. If this mandate is raised and enacted by a member of the Scions of Ravensfell chapter, ideally the Castellan of the Silent Sentinel racer, then it will only cost 25 doses of Liao and will have the additional effect of increasing interest in the place of pilgrimage they oversee. This will increase the donations from pilgrims visiting the shrines there to 1 throne each season. More importantly, regardless of who raises and enacts the mandate, it will encourage the people of Highguard to double down on their support for the benefactors. As long as the Sodality has been given the power to commission a citadel as described above, the ability of the Benefactors Council to support a civilian commission would be expanded to include any citadel commissioned in any region adjacent to a region with the Valorn quality. In addition, the white granite donations provided by highborn citizens would increase from 10 wains a season to 12 wains a season, reflecting the depth of support for a vigilant approach to the war with the Valorn. With thousands of Grey Pilgrims returned home inspired to take the virtuous fight to the Valorn, people in Highguard are eager to see the nation put their shoulder to that wheel and would increase their support for the Council in the hope that they would choose to support citadels commissioned by the Valorn when the Council deemed it appropriate. The mandate needs to be enacted at the summer solstice to be effective, as with any mandate, but the Stone Eyrie know that securing political outcomes can take longer. As long as the Sodality is granted the power to commission, upgrade and repair citadels by the end of the winter solstice, 387YE, the benefactor's ability to secure white granite for commissions will be increased at that point. Water purifies. The Green Watcher has a unique connection to the eternal Lord Rain. Lord Rain has indicated that he considers the Valorn a sickness that needs healing. The Green Watcher might be in a position to encourage Lord Rain to support the Valorn, assuming the Eternal is still around. The Green Watch was built in 385YE in Cassinea as the result of a boon offered by Lord Rain. The Eternal provides access to unique magic items designed to help the Highborn in their fight against the Valorn. A second opportunity was offered to the Navarre, but they declined. Beckburn is not a warlike creature, but acknowledges the need for the Valorn to be ended. At the moment, the relationship between the Empire and the Cupbearer hangs in the balance. The situation in Thorunin is potentially disastrous. If the Eternal's requirements cannot be met, he says he will withdraw from the Empire. What that means for the Green Watcher is not clear. Assuming the situation can be resolved, however, the current Green Watcher Juliet might be in a position to encourage Willowbraid to offer patronage to the Valorn. Several Magisters believe that a plenipotentiary from the Archmage of Spring asking on behalf of the Green Watcher either for an audience to discuss the Valorn or simply requesting his support for the new Sodality might have greater weight than such a request from the Archmage alone. If Brother Harvest could be persuaded to provide some of the tools of healing and protection he provides to the Green Watcher, or mentioned during his initial approach to the Empire, they might prove valuable tools in helping the Valorn do their duties. Bound by Thorn. Navarre. The Navarre could refuse to support the new Sodality and boycott it as an insult to their heritage. The nation could embrace the new sodality as the best opportunity to defeat the Valorn. The Third Navarre army could be amended to be appointed by the sodality. If that happens, then the sodality could choose one army each season to allow the general to replace their current quality for Thornbound at a cost of 15 mithril. Some members of the Navarre are unsure what to make of the Valorn Guard. More than a few are irked by the creation of the sodality. Their nation has been fighting the Valorn for the best part of 1,000 years, and now the Empire wants to make a sodality to do it. It's easy to find that insulting. They agree that the Navarre should boycott the sodality to show their disdain. Not everyone takes that view, however. Most Navarre understand that they cannot possibly destroy the Valorn alone. That's why they supported the creation of the Empire. Only a military power as strong as the Empire could hope to defeat the enemy. The Valorn Guard could be the perfect opportunity to collaborate with Highguard, the League, the Varushkans, and other supportive nations, working together with them to defeat the Valorn, or encouraging those nations that have other priorities to come around to their way of thinking. They argue that the Navarre should perform some grand display of support for the Valorn Guard to clearly demonstrate to the nation that this is the best route to pursue. Such a dramatic gesture is certainly possible. The Navarre have just commissioned a Third Navarre army to be raised in Treji in the Glen of Shadows. That army has been raised on the basis that the general will be legally appointed by the Navarre senators, but that could be changed. The Navarre could push the Senate to amend the title so that the general of the new army would be appointed by the Valorn Guard. Such a change would require a constitutional vote, needing ratification by the throne, but the biggest obstacle is likely to be other members of the Navarre. It's hard to imagine there would be much talk of the Navarre boycotting the sodality if they were also asking the sodality to appoint the general of one of the Navarre armies. There would be no point in doing this if the nation weren't intending to give the sodality their full-throated support. As a result, presumably there would be a lot of members of the Navarre in the sodality to vote each year when the title came up for election. Even so, it would mean accepting that members of other nations have a say over who leads a Navarre army. That requires a huge leap of faith, but it's hard to imagine a better way to convince the world that the nation stands fully behind the new sodality, willing to support it, joined with it in the pursuit of the Valorn's destruction. And who knows, maybe a general appointed by the Valorn Guard would put a higher priority on fighting the Valorn than some other generals have to date. If the Imperial Senate took the unprecedented step of amending the new Navarre army to make it appointed by the sodality, if they chose to place their trust in the Valorn Guard in this way, then it would inspire many Navarre with experience of fighting the Valorn to do likewise. The Thornbound Steading are one such group. Formed by a handful of survivors who escaped the recent destruction of Azalea's Dance, they have come together with other like-minded warriors intent on finding ways to help the Empire fight the Valorn. If the Navarre chose to commit to the new sodality and are able to persuade the Senate to put the Valorn Guard in charge of the new army, then the Thornbound Steading will do everything they can to support the new sodality. Each summit, the sodality could ask, by simple majority vote, the Steading and their allies to train an Imperial army. Any army selected by the sodality could swap their current quality for Thornbound using 15 wains of mithril. To accept the help, the general of the army would need to place 15 wains in their inventory at the end of the event and email plot@profounddecisions.co.uk. Such an option would be unlikely to be appealing for an army whose quality is widely admired and appreciated, but it could help to develop armies that lacked effective focus into an effective force against the Valorn. It might also just be the start. A suitably worded appraisal might be able to identify other methods of fighting the Valorn, perhaps more suited to the strengths of individual nations when coupled with the expertise of Navarre's Thorns. For further reading, please see the pages on Valorn Guard, Imperial Sodality, Valorn, Thornbound Quality, Advisor on the Valorn, Boyar of the Iron Roads, and the page on the Burgher of Ketsov.